Today we'll be talking about Chicago energy usage and how it plays a big role in how total energy consumptions can be measured by looking at how energy production is processed. On behalf of this project, I would like to thank Ryan, Omar, and Omar as my partners. Let me give you a little detail about energy usage, which is today we're going to focus on wattage and hours, which is known as kWh, is wattage, kilowatt wattage in hours. And the questions that we're going to focus on is in what months our wattage is higher? Do wattage tend to go up in the winter or the summer? Um, do commercial or residential buildings use much wattage? In our observation, we used 6,751 different buildings of sorts, residential to commercial. We use compared analysis with 73 variables. So I give you the abstract, which is the page for our website with understanding the data, which is involved. Our team breaking down the raw data, making bar graphs, scatter plots, box plots. We did filtering, filtering out variables that was not needed, applicable for the data to show relevance to how much energy is being consumption. Um, Doing the variables that we eliminated, we come up with a regression line that gives us the scatter plot, and it better give us analysis as far as how well the data set fits to the building of sort and answer the questions that we have before you. So in 2010, the world total electricity production was about 20.27 petawatt hours. This number consumes to the average power of 2.31 TW continuous during the year. That was totally in um, Illinois. So I give you the data exploration. So during this view, we have the breakdown of the data, which gives us Chicago Energy. We use RStudio to deliver the findings in this. The packages that we used for this was a tidyverse package, a dplyr. We use a ggplot to cipher the data in order to get us the information we needed to further do the analysis. We come up with community areas that give us census blocks. We have building types. It goes from January of that year through December, which the information was collected due to the census. I noticed that the medium and the max for these various times that had winter months, January, February, and March, was extremely higher than the ones that they have in the later months as August, June, and September. The question I asked then is, do they use more air conditioning, or is that part of the wattage, or do they use more light during the winter because of the cold? So as I cycle through we have variables as um, electricity accounts and thermal, meaning that thermal was the actual heat bill being added on to the electric, which was a separate entity that they had going on. So that gives us a clear breakdown of the medium, the first quad, the second quad, meaning that how the quartiles was evenly or oddly matched against those that it shows us. So um, it shows relevance to what we asking, the questions that we refer to now. What are the reasons unoccupied buildings do have high wattage, meaning that the standard deviation for those consumptions do not deviate, meaning that during the winter time they want to keep the heat at a certain rate because they don't want the pipes to freeze. So that answers part of that question. So as I go through this data that was ciphered out by RStudio, which gives us a clear analysis about how to compare the quartiles from the third and the second quarters within that year, which is 2010, and it gives us the occupied units compared to the percentage of the average story buildings that was used during that time, and give us a great analysis as far as how it was identifiable for those. So most of the variables are numerical. Some are data that's broken down into months and quartiles. Here I give a simple box plot that's comparing the building type and the average building age, meaning that the newer model buildings did not vary from the older building areas. More of the commercial buildings had been up for at least 50 years. None of them was right screwed. Majority of them was symmetric to the resident, to the information that we had carried over. The industrial had showed no box plot, meaning that the variations with that was just, it was very few to compare the analysis with those in the industrial buildings, meaning that they might have had poor lighting during that time, or they did not use as much lighting for variability in those cases. So as I compare and contrast with this, I give out, we do a quartile of the first 2010 to the middle quartile, and gives a color demonstration of the graph and bars, which is because we don't use a regression on this, it just gives us that the commercial buildings have a higher voltage, meaning that the kilowatt per wattage hours was high in the first quarters of those months, meaning that some, I guess, roughly around January to March, that it's detailed in. So this example is a code made by R Markdown, which was created first looking over the data to eventually get filtered down to give us a better understanding of the data that we're using at hand. So this next is a bar graph that gives us the total comparisons between the residential and the commercial. In this setting of the building, the residential uses more count variability far as more wattage for the lighting and variations of small increments. So for instance, residentials tend to have their lights on for a longer stretch of period during a class of day than the commercials. And that seems to be right, because if a commercial building is open from 6 in the morning to 5 or 7 in the evening, that outweighs the residential, which might have the light on from 6 in the morning to 10 o'clock at night till it's time to go to bed. So this simple bar graph shows a number of buildings and gives us a sectional information about Chicago and how wattage is being used and how it is calculated as far as energy, which gives us a great analysis as far as the count. So I goes over to the regression line that explains in more detail about how commercial buildings might be among residentials, and see the correlation to see if the analysis is scientifically or significantly how it plays out far as the 2010. So what we see right here is it's negatively correlated. It's a lot of outliers that just projected with the commercial buildings. We see residential at the small percentage, meaning that from the area that we had did this assessment from, it was a lot of commercial buildings that was in the data that was not filtered out due to the raw data filtering. and above, the filter regression graphs give us energy consumption that are normally built within the city of Chicago. So this graph, some here is are which homes this people live in Chicago. So like that's the difference, meaning that the commercial buildings had put out more wattage during that particular quartile than the residentials from when we had took the raw data and cleaned it. So this right here gives us another printout of the building type of industrial, which we seem to have none, but we didn't use a regression on this just to see if this graph would give out a better um, output far as the wattage is usage. So this is compared to residential, who we use as the dependent, and we use commercial as the independent. So this gives us where they're almost even, where the residential is somewhere between three, 30,000 wattage that's used within that single month, and the commercial, which rises all the way up to maybe over 100,000 far as kWhs. So this gives us a better comparisons. So then we use another chart to see if the residential is compared to into a way where a second quarter to see if that part of the season was better, and it gives us a lower output for the commercial, meaning that some of the buildings during that we assessed the first time was not out of service, but they have more business during the first quarters and second quarters of the year. So those two graphs are filtered to show the data has both quartiles in commercial buildings use the most energy. However, fewer blues on the dots at the beginning of the cluster represents the residential homes. The data rest of the quartile shows very similar information, which just proves commercial buildings use more energy during those building types. This data, we have raw data where you can find it on our link, which will give you a better analysis and can assess how we come up with the information if you want to do your research on it. And I'd like to thank you for tuning in. Bye.